Lucius Aelius Sejanus, commonly known as Sejanus, was an ambitious soldier, friend and confidant of the Roman Emperor Tiberius. An equestrian by birth, Sejanus rose to power as prefect of the Roman imperial bodyguard, known as the Praetorian Guard, of which he was commander from AD 14 until his death in AD 31. While the Praetorian Guard was formally established under Emperor Augustus, Sejanus introduced a number of reforms which saw the unit evolve beyond a mere bodyguard, into a powerful and influential branch of the government involved in public security, civil administration and ultimately political intercession, changes which would have a lasting impact on the course of the Principate. During the 20s, Sejanus gradually accumulated power by consolidating his influence over Tiberius and eliminating potential political opponents, including the emperor's son, Drusus Julius Caesar. When Tiberius withdrew to Capri in 26, Sejanus was left in control of the administration of the empire. For a time the most influential and feared citizen of Rome, Sejanus suddenly fell from power in 31, the year his career culminated with the consulship. Amidst suspicions of conspiracy against Tiberius, Sejanus was arrested and executed, along with his followers. Family. Sejanus was born in 20 BC at Volsini, Etruria, into the family of Lucius Caius Strabo. The Sei were Romans of the equestrian class, the lower of the two upper social classes of the Roman Republic and the early Roman Empire. Sejanus' grandfather maintained relations with senatorial families through his marriage with Terentia, a sister of the wife of Gaius Maecenas, who was one of Emperor Augustus' most powerful political allies. Strabo married into equally illustrious families. He may have married a daughter of Quintus Aelius Tubero, allying himself with the more prestigious Aelian gens. Lucius Caius Tubero, who became suffect consul in 18, was probably his son. Strabo's last wife was Cosconia Gallata, sister of Servius Cornelius Lentulus Malugan and Cis and Publius Cornelius Lentulus Scipio, and perhaps half-sister of Quintus Junius Blasius. Sejanus could have been a child of this marriage. He was later adopted into the Aelian gens by Gaius Aelius Gallus, and by Roman custom became known as Lucius Aelius Sejanus or simply as Sejanus. The adoptive family of Sejanus counted two consuls among their ranks, Quintus Aelius Tubero and Sextus Aelius Catus, who was the father of Aelia Paratina, the second wife of the future Emperor Claudius. Sejanus' uncle, Junius Blasius, distinguished himself as a military commander. He became proconsul of Africa in 21 and earned triumphal honors by crushing the rebellion of Tacfarinas. According to the ancient historian Tacitus, Sejanus was also a former favorite of the wealthy Marcus Gavius Apicius, whose daughter may have been Sejanus' first wife Apicata. With Apicata, Sejanus had 3 children, 2 sons and 1 daughter. Strabo, Capito Aelianus and Junior. Rise to power. Praetorian prefect. It is likely that Sejanus' father Strabo came to the attention of Augustus through his father's connection with Maecenas. Sometime after 02 BC, Strabo was appointed prefect of the Praetorian Guard, one of the 2 most powerful positions a Roman knight could attain in the empire. This office he carried on dutifully and without incident until the death of Augustus in 14. Little is known about the life Sejanus led prior to this date, but according to Tacitus, he accompanied Gaius Caesar, adopted grandson of Augustus, during his campaigns in Armenia in 01 BC. It was upon the accession of Tiberius in 14, that Sejanus was appointed prefect of the Praetorian Guard as the colleague of his father Strabo, and began his rise to prominence. The Praetorian Guard was an elite unit of the Roman army formed by Augustus in 27 BC, with the specific function to serve as a bodyguard to the emperor and members of the imperial family. Much more than a guard, however, the Praetorians also managed the day-to-day care of the city, such as general security and civil administration. Furthermore, their presence served as a constant reminder to the people and the Senate of the substantial armed force which served as the basis for the imperial power. Augustus was careful, however, to uphold the republican veneer of this regime, and only allowed 9 cohorts to be formed, which were inconspicuously scattered across various lodging houses in the city, and commanded by 2 prefects. When Strabo was assigned to the governorship of Egypt in 15, Sejanus became the sole commander of the Praetorians and instigated reforms that helped shape the Guard into a powerful tool of the Principate. In 20, the scattered encampments inside the city were centralized into a single garrison just outside Rome, and the number of cohorts was increased from 9 to 12, one of which now held the daily guard at the palace. The practice of joint leadership between 2 prefects was abandoned, and Sejanus himself appointed the centurions and tribunes. With these changes in effect, Sejanus now commanded the complete loyalty of a force of around 12,000 soldiers, all of which were at his immediate disposal. The facade of Augustus was no longer maintained, and Tiberius openly displayed the strength of the Guard at parades. Feud with Drusus. In his capacity of Praetorian prefect, Sejanus quickly became a trusted advisor to Tiberius. By 23, he exerted a considerable influence over the decisions of the emperor, who referred to Sejanus as socius laborum. By this time he had been raised to the rank of praetor, a position which was not normally granted to Romans of the equestrian class. A statue had been erected in his honor in the theatre of Pompey, and in the Senate. His followers were advanced with public offices and governorships. However, this privileged position caused resentment among the senatorial class and the imperial family, in particular earning him the enmity of Drusus Julius Caesar, Tiberius' son. The history of Sejanus and Drusus dated back to at least 15 AD. That year a mutiny had broken out among legions posted in Pannonia and Germania. While his adopted son Germanicus restored order in Germania, Tiberius, a biological son Drusus, was sent to quell the uprising in Pannonia, accompanied by Sejanus and 2 Praetorian cohorts, in part due to what the soldiers believed to be bad omens. Drusus quickly managed to restore the stability in the army and publicly put the chief instigators to death. The camp was purged of mutineers by the Praetorians and the legions returned to the winter barracks. Despite this success, the following years witnessed a growing animosity between Drusus and Sejanus. Since the accession of Tiberius, Drusus had been systematically groomed as the successor of his father, successfully commanding legions in Illyricum in 18, and sharing the consulship with Tiberius in 21. In practice it was still Sejanus who was the second man in the empire, and he was ambitious to further expand his power. As early as 20, Sejanus had sought to solidify his connection with the imperial family, by betrothing his daughter Junia to the son of Claudius Drusus. At the time the girl was only 4 years old, but the marriage was prevented when the boy accidentally died a few days later of asphyxiation. When this failed, it seems Sejanus turned his attention toward eliminating Drusus. By 23, the enmity between the 2 men had reached a critical point. During an argument, Drusus had struck the prefect with his fist, and he openly lamented that a stranger was invited to assist in the government while the emperor's son was alive. With Tiberius already in his 60s, there was a real possibility of Drusus succeeding his father in the near future. To secure his position, Sejanus secretly plotted against Drusus and seduced his wife Livilla. With her as an accomplice, Drusus was slowly poisoned and died of seemingly natural causes on September 13, 23. Consolidation of power. The loss of his son was a major blow to Tiberius, personally and politically. Over the years he had grown increasingly disillusioned with the position of princeps, and by sharing the tribunician powers with Drusus in 22 had prepared to relent some of his responsibilities in favor of his son. With these hopes now dashed, Tiberius left his administration more than ever in the care of Sejanus and looked toward the sons of Germanicus as possible heirs. Germanicus had died in somewhat suspicious circumstances in Syria. Following his death, his wife Agrippina the Elder returned to Rome with their 6 children and became increasingly involved with a group of senators who opposed the growing power of Sejanus. Her relations with Tiberius became increasingly fraught, as she made it clear that she believed that he was responsible for the death of Germanicus. The climate was further poisoned by the hatred that Tiberius and mother Livia Drusilla felt for her, since Agrippina's ambition to be the mother of emperors and thus Rome's first woman was an open secret. To Sejanus, Agrippina's sons Nero Caesar, Drusus Caesar and Caligula were a threat to his power. Sejanus again attempted to marry into the Julio-Claudian family. Having divorced Apicata 2 years earlier, he requested marriage with Drusus's widow Livilla in 25, possibly with an eye towards placing himself, as an adopted Julian, in the position of a potential successor. The emperor denied this request, warning Sejanus that he was in danger of overstepping his rank. Alarmed by this sudden denigration, Sejanus changed his plans and began to isolate Tiberius from Rome. By fueling his paranoia towards Agrippina and the Senate, he induced the emperor to withdraw to the countryside of Campania, which he did in 26, and finally to the island of Capri, where he lived until his death in 37. Guarded by the Praetorians, Sejanus easily controlled all information that passed between Tiberius and the capital. Despite the withdrawal of Tiberius from Rome's political scene, the presence of Livia seems to have checked Sejanus' overt power for a time. According to Tacitus, her death in 29 changed all that. Sejanus began a series of purge trials of senators and wealthy equestrians in the city, removing those capable of opposing his power as well as extending the imperial treasury. Networks of spies and informers brought the victims to trial with false accusations of treason, and many chose suicide over the disgrace of being condemned and executed. Among those who perished were Gaius Asinius Gallus, a prominent senator and opponent of Tiberius who was linked to Agrippina's faction. Agrippina and 2 of her sons, Nero and Drusus, were arrested and exiled in 30 and later starved to death in suspicious circumstances. Only Caligula, as the last remaining son of Germanicus, managed to survive the purges of Sejanus, and that he did by moving to Capri with Tiberius in 31. Downfall. Denunciation in 31. Despite his equestrian rank, Sejanus shared the consulship with Tiberius in absentia, and finally became betrothed to Livilla. Tiberius had not been seen in Rome since 26, and senators and equestrians courted Sejanus's favor, as if he were emperor. His birthday was publicly observed and statues were erected in his honor. With most of the political opposition crushed, Sejanus felt his position was unassailable. As the ancient historian Cassius Dio writes, Sejanus was so great a person by reason both of his excessive haughtiness and of his vast power, that, to put it briefly, he himself seemed to be the emperor and Tiberius a kind of island potentate, inasmuch as the latter spent his time on the island of Capria. Through years of crafty intrigues and indispensable service to the emperor, Sejanus had worked himself up to become the most powerful man in the empire. But suddenly, at the end of 31, he was arrested, summarily executed and his body unceremoniously cast down the Gemonian stairs. What caused his downfall is unclear. Ancient historians disagree about the nature of his conspiracy, whether it was Tiberius or Sejanus who struck first and in which order subsequent events occurred. Modern historians consider it unlikely that Sejanus plotted to seize power, and if he had planned so at all, rather might have aimed at overthrowing Tiberius to serve as a regent to Tiberius Gemellus, son of Drusus, or possibly Gaius Caligula. Unfortunately, the relevant section pertaining to this period in the Annals of Tacitus has been lost. According to Josephus, it was Antonia, the mother of Livilla, who finally alerted Tiberius to the growing threat Sejanus posed. In a letter she dispatched to Capri in the care of her freedman Pallas. According to Juvenal, a letter was sent from Capri with the orders to execute Sejanus without a trial. Further details concerning Sejanus' fall are provided by Cassius Dio, writing nearly 200 years later in his Roman history. It appears that, when Tiberius heard to what extent Sejanus had already usurped his authority in Rome, he immediately took steps to remove him from power. However, he realized that an outright condemnation could provoke Sejanus to attempt a coup. Instead, Tiberius addressed a number of contradictory letters to the Senate, some of which praised Sejanus and his friends and some of which denounced him. Tiberius variously announced that he would arrive in Rome the next day or that he was at the point of death. He stepped down as consul, forcing Sejanus to do the same, and conferred an honorary priesthood upon Caligula, rekindling popular support for the House of Germanicus. The ensuing confusion was successful in alienating Sejanus from many of his followers. With the intentions of the emperor no longer clear, it was now deemed a safer course of action at Rome to withdraw from overt support to Sejanus, until the matter was clearly settled. When it became clear to Tiberius that support for Sejanus was not as strong as the emperor had feared, his next step was to choose Naevius Sartorius Macro, previously prefect of the Vigila, to replace Sejanus and effect his downfall. On October 1831, Sejanus was summoned to a Senate meeting by a letter from Tiberius, ostensibly to bestow the tribunician powers upon him. At dawn, he entered the Senate, but while the letter was being read, Macro assumed control of the Praetorian Guard, and members of the Vigila led by Asinius Lacos surrounded the building. The senators at first congratulated Sejanus, but when the letter, which first digressed into completely unrelated matters, suddenly denounced him and ordered his arrest, he was immediately surrounded and escorted to prison. Execution and aftermath. That same evening, the Senate convened at the Temple of Concord and summarily condemned Sejanus to death. He was led from prison and strangled. His body was cast onto the Gemonian stairs, where the crowd tore it to pieces. Riots ensued, in which crowds hunted and killed anyone they could link to Sejanus. The Praetorians also resorted to looting, when they were accused of having conspired with the former prefect. Following the issue of Damnation Memoria by the Senate, his statues were torn down and his name obliterated from all public records. On October 24, Sejanus' eldest son Strabo was arrested and executed. Upon learning of his death, Apicata committed suicide, after addressing a letter to Tiberius, claiming that Drusus had been poisoned with the complicity of Livilla. The accusations were further corroborated by confessions from Livilla's slaves, who, under torture, admitted to having administered the poison to Drusus. Enraged upon learning the truth, Tiberius soon ordered more killings. Livilla committed suicide or was starved to death by her mother Antonia Minor. The remaining children of Sejanus, Capito Aelianus and Junia, were executed in December of that year. According to ancient historians, because there was no precedent for the capital punishment of a virgin, Junia was raped first, with the rope around her neck. Their bodies were thrown down the Gemonian stairs. At the beginning of the following year, Damnation Memoria was passed on Livilla. Although Rome at first rejoiced at the demise of Sejanus, the city quickly plunged into more extensive trials. As Tiberius persecuted all those who could in any way be tied to the schemes of Sejanus or had courted his friendship, the senatorial ranks were purged. The hardest hit were those families with political ties to the Julians. Even the imperial magistracy was not exempted from Tiberius' wrath. Arrests and executions were now supervised by Naevius Sartorius Macro. The political turmoil would continue until the death of Tiberius in 37, after which he was succeeded by Caligula. Most historical documentation of Tiberius' revenge is given from Suetonius and Tacitus. The portrayal of the tyrannical, vengeful emperor has been challenged by several modern historians. Edward Togo Salmon wrote that, in the whole 22 years of Tiberius' reign, not more than 52 persons were accused of treason, of whom almost half escaped conviction, while the 4 innocent people to be condemned fell victims to the excessive zeal of the Senate, not to the emperor's tyranny.